Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. We take complex sources, break them down, and distill them into fascinating insights you can actually use. Today, we're embarking on a very special deep dive, specifically into Episode 3 of the incredible Reading Finnegans Wake in 200 Sessions podcast. For those of you who've joined us on previous dives into Joyce, you know this isn't just a book, it's an entire universe. And today, we're venturing into one of the most famously dense literary works ever written, focusing on a pivotal, yet utterly captivating, section from Chapter 1, pages 8-10. It's often referred to as the Museyroom. It's an absolute textual labyrinth, but one that promises an incredible journey if you're willing to explore its winding paths with us.
That's right, the Museyroom. It isn't just a location in Finnegans Wake, it's really a living, breathing metaphor for the entire book. It's quite something. It's a whirlwind of history, myth, and intensely personal drama, all disguised, you could say, as a rather bizarre tour through a very unusual museum. Our mission today is to unpack this section, revealing how James Joyce, with his, unparalleled genius, constructs this bizarre yet deeply resonant narrative. We're going to explore its many layers, from a seemingly literal battle recounting to a complex commentary on the very nature of history, memory, and even Joyce's own intensely intricate creative process. It truly is a microcosm of the entire book, challenging our most fundamental assumptions about what a story can be and how language works. By the end, you'll have a much clearer picture of what makes Finnegans Wake so utterly unique and why this particular section is a testament to its boundless genius. It's a challenge, yes, definitely a challenge, but one that offers immense rewards in understanding the limits and possibilities of narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our journey begins with a guide named Kate, or sometimes Mistress Kate, who leads us through what she rather grandly calls the Museyroom. But right away, you get the sense this isn't your average historical exhibition, as it feels like much more than just, dusty artifacts behind velvet ropes. What exactly is this Museyroom that Joyce is presenting?
Far from it. That's the first crucial insight here. Joyce immediately blurs the lines. You think you know what it is, but then. The Museyroom is initially presented as a waxwork museum, a collection of static, maybe even grotesque dioramas depicting age-old battles. Think Madame Tussauds, but for warfare. But its identity is constantly shape-shifting, much like the Wake itself. Almost immediately, it also becomes a music room, maybe a place for contemplation, or perhaps a subtle nod to the musicality of Joyce's premise itself, or, the kind of chamber music Molly Bloom might have once enjoyed. But then it morphs into something far more mundane, even crude, a chamber pot, an outhouse, even a dung heap or midden heap, where discarded objects are piled up.
Wow. So it's a space of creation, art, and history, but also one of decay and disposal. That's quite a jarring juxtaposition.
Exactly. And this constant fluidity of meaning, this refusal to settle on a single fixed identity, is absolutely key to understanding Finnegans Wake. The profound insight here is that Joyce challenges our very human need for fixed categories, for neat classifications. He really pushes back against that. He forces us to embrace ambiguity, not as a weakness or a flaw in the narrative, but as a more honest and profound reflection of how memory, history, and even identity truly operate in our minds, constantly shifting, merging, and recontextualizing, never entirely one thing or another. It's a place where things are collected and preserved, certainly, but also where they are degraded, recontextualized, and then crucially, prepared for regeneration. Think of it almost as a historical compost heap, really fertile ground in a way.
And Kate, our guide in this ever-shifting space, she's not just a detached curator, is she? Her role seems much more active, almost performative, and, rather peculiar. What's her specific function in this journey?
Her role is indeed crucial and multi-layered. She's described as a janitrix, which is interesting in itself, and a collector and preserver of discarded objects, essentially a scavenger. She's the one literally sweeping up the detritus of history, yet also trying to frame it for us. She guides us through this chaotic exhibition with a highly distinctive, almost hypnotic, repeated phrase. This is pointing out specific items no less than 57 times throughout the section.
57 times. Wow.
Yeah, it creates this rhythm, and this rhythmic repetition isn't just a stylistic choice. It directly echoes the cumulative structure of the classic nursery rhyme, The House That Jack Built, which itself builds layer upon layer of a narrative.
Right. So she's building history for us, this is at a time, almost like a child's story.
That's fascinating. Precisely. And in this tour, she punctuates her narrative with deliberate pauses, allowing you, the listener, to study these incredibly dense and fragmented objects. But here's the twist. She even interjects with requests for tips, overtly highlighting her role as a panhandling guide. This isn't just a historical tour, she's selling history, or perhaps just trying to survive off its scraps, blurring the line between history teller and beggar, between the grand narrative and the gritty reality of trying to make a living from it. It shows us that even the presentation of history is subject to economic realities and personal agendas, never truly objective.
That's a brilliant insight into how narratives were constructed and then quite literally consumed or sold. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. This whole bizarre museum tour wasn't just pulled from thin air. Joyce himself had a deeply personal experience that clearly inspired this section. It's often that direct human connection that makes his work so powerful, even when it feels impenetrable on the surface.
Indeed, that's one of the most compelling insights into Joyce's process here. We know from historical accounts that in September 1926, Joyce and his family toured the actual battlefield of Waterloo in Belgium, and American novelist Thomas Wolfe, quite famously, even observed him there. Apparently, he was just watching Joyce. Wolfe noted Joyce's apparent interest in the local guide's harangue delivered in broken English and his persistent, detailed questions. So this wasn't a passive observation. Joyce was actively engaging extracting material from this real-world encounter, this direct engagement with a historical site experienced through the filter of a local, possibly quite idiosyncratic guide, very likely fueled the entire Museyroom concept. It imbued it with that sense of a fragmented, almost comedic, yet deeply personal and commercialized historical retelling we see in the Wake. It shows how Joyce found inspiration in the most mundane yet deeply human interactions.
So it's not just the tour experience itself, but the physical location of the battlefield that gets woven into this dreamlike narrative. He takes these real places and then distorts, conflates, and reimagines them within the Wake. Can you tell us more about how these real landmarks become part of Joyce's internal landscape?
Absolutely. The physical space of the Museyroom itself is this kind of surreal fusion of real-life Belgian landmarks. It's quite clever. We're talking about the cylindrical panorama building, which houses an immense immersive painting of the Battle of Waterloo, and the conical lion's mound, that 43-foot artificial hill topped with a colossal lion statue built to commemorate the battle. In the Wake, this very mound becomes an image for the Museyroom's exterior, ingeniously integrated as part of HTC's reclining body under Dublin, that recurring motif in the book.
Ah, right. The sleeping giant under the city.
Exactly. This allows for a proud's eye view from its summit, a kind of omniscient perspective, but it also literally embeds the historical site within the very landscape and body of the city's patriarch. And adding to this fluidity, inside the Museyroom, the wax figures themselves are not static. They fluidly transform, shifting from horse to man and vice versa. This reflects the unstable, constantly metamorphosing identities of the characters and the chaotic, shifting nature of battle and memory in Joyce's dream world. It's a place where physical reality is utterly malleable, really serving the purpose of the narrative's ever-changing perspective.
That blending of real landscapes with the human form and the shifting identities, it really sets the stage for our central characters. Let's turn to Wellington. He's clearly an avatar for the Duke of Wellington, but as you'd expect with Joyce, he layers so much more onto him. It's like a historical figure, a mythical hero, and the book's protagonists all rolled into one complex, often contradictory entity.
Precisely. Wellington is far more than just Arthur Wellesley, the victorious Duke of Wellington. You've got to see him as, crucially, H.C.E. Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker. HCE is the enigmatic, often grotesque protagonist of Finnegans Wake, that recurring half-man, half-horse figure who embodies Dublin itself and its patriarchal authority. But his identity extends even further. He's deeply associated with King William III of Orange.
Of the Battle of the Boyne fame.
Exactly. Famous for his decisive victory at the Battle of the Boyne in Ireland, an event of immense historical and political significance. He's also linked to the legendary King Arthur, imbuing him with a mythic, almost chivalric aura. And his name itself, Wellington, directly echoes the Lord's Prayer, "Thy will be done," suggesting a godlike stature, or at least a sense of divine authority and preordained victory. But given Joyce's satirical bent, it also carries an undercurrent of hubris, questioning whether this will is truly divine or merely human ambition. The insight here is that Joyce creates figures that are historical palimpsests, just layered with centuries of meaning, simultaneously grand and mundane.
He's a figure of immense power, but also in typical Joycean fashion, he's described with a level of almost absurd detail tied to very specific, almost mundane objects. It really grounds him, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It brings him down to earth, even amidst the grandeur. We see Wellington, grand and pageantic in his golden spurs and his iron ducks. This isn't just a colorful description, it's the very first instance of an HCE signature in the Wake, a recurring list of 7 items of clothing that function as a symbolic identifier for the character even as he metamorphoses. So here we have his Golden spurs, gold but maybe cheap tin, his iron ducks, a play on tuxedo or duck trousers, but also ducks meaning leader, then quarter-brass woody shoes, clogs or galoshes, mixing common and slightly exotic materials, magnate's garters, Bangkok's best, Golier's galoshes, and easing war trews, possibly a vest, evoking easy on wartime trousers. This signature isn't just a quirky detail, it's a recurring motif throughout the Wake that Joyce uses to reinforce HCE's identity even as he transforms. Each item carries symbolic weight, hinting at his pride, his vulnerability, and his often humorous connection to the mundane, rooting this grand mythic figure in everyday absurdity. It's a way Joyce stamps his central figure onto the text, a subtle anchor in the textual chaos, ensuring that even in the most fantastical moments, HCE is always subtly present.
And his horse, Copenhagen, also seems to carry a heavy symbolic load, almost as much as Wellington himself. It's not just an animal, it's a symbolic partner, it seems.
Indeed, very much so. His horse, Copenhagen, is clearly Wellington's famous charger, Copenhagen. But there's a crucial, deliberate departure from historical fact. Wellington's real horse was chestnut, not white. Yet here it's explicitly described as white, a symbol strongly associated with King William III in Ireland.
Ah, the white horse symbolism in Ireland.
Exactly, especially with his triumphant entry into Dublin on a white horse after the Battle of the Boyne. This intentional shift makes the white horse a key motif throughout the Wake, and significantly, it later becomes a target, echoing real-world acts of political vandalism in Irish history, such as the repeated attacks on King William's statue in Dublin. This transformation underscores Joyce's layering of historical and mythical allusions, where even a seemingly minor detail like a horse's color carries deep historical and political resonance. It makes you constantly question what you think you know.
And it wouldn't be Joyce without a healthy dose of explicit, often crude sexual innuendo woven into the heroic narrative. He constantly deflates the heroic with the earthy and the physical, doesn't he?
Without a doubt. And this is where Joyce is at his most subversive and, well, humorous. His big white horse, a blatant pun on both horse and arse, it's right there, and his tallow scoop, which combines telescope with a kitchen device for pouring melted tallow into candle molds, is deeply imbued with sexual undertones. The tallow scoop is described as a wunderworker and sex-caliber frost power, overtly phallic and capable of extension like a penis and explicitly provoked by the Jinnies. This firmly grounds the grand historical epic, the noble general on his steed, in the base human body and its functions, humorously deflating any sense of pure, unadulterated heroism. It reminds us of the primal, often messy forces at play beneath the veneer of historical glory. Joyce uses this to demystify, to bring the epic down to a very human, often undignified level.
Okay, so opposing Wellington are the Lipoleums, a fascinating trio that also transforms, constantly shifting their identities, much like the Museyroom itself. They're not just a simple, singular enemy. What do these figures represent?
Yes, Lipoleum is, well, it's a clear play on Napoleon, obviously, but it's often pluralized, suggesting not just Napoleon Bonaparte, but also Napoleon II and Napoleon III, representing a lineage, maybe, or a recurring challenge to established power. Crucially, in the Wake, they represent the twin sons, Shem and Shaun. For listeners less familiar with the Wake, Shem is often associated with the artist, the writer, the more introspective and subversive twin, while Shaun is the more conventional, outgoing, and public figure. So the Lipoleums can be seen as either the twins themselves or a combined Protean Shem-Shaun character. They are depicted as young soldiers, initially named with a raw, primal, and somewhat crude energy. Tushel, Fitztuamush, Dirty McDyke, and Harry O'Hurry, kind of earthy names. Later, their names shift again to Hennessy, the Hindu, and Dooley, reflecting their fluid identities and the conflation of various historical and literary figures from different cultures, emphasizing the universal nature of conflict.
So they're smaller or less imposing figures, contrasting with the big Wellington. Does this size difference signify a power imbalance or maybe something more cyclical?
Absolutely. Both, I think. They are consistently described as petty or beg, a play on petit or small Lipoleums, contrasting sharply with the big Wellington. This size difference establishes a clear power dynamic of challenger versus established authority. But it's also cyclical, as you say. The phrase bog Lipoleum, playing on big Napoleon, and bog house, meaning toilet, mortaring the Lipoleum beg, little Napoleon, suggests an internal conflict. It suggests a cycle of dominance and submission, or even a self-cannibalizing aspect of history and power, mirroring Vico's cyclical theories of rise and fall. It shows that even the victors contain the seeds of their own destruction, perhaps, or that new challengers always emerge from the old order.
And their physical state on the battlefield sounds pretty grim, too. Very visceral.
Indeed, it is. They are depicted crouching down in the living ditch, a phrase that immediately evokes a living death in a ditch. This imagery carries multiple layers of meaning. It directly references the famous sunken lane at Waterloo, where French cavalry met their demise. It also alludes to the horrific, squalid trenches of World War I, which would have been very fresh in memory. And symbolically, it connects to HCE himself on the Privy, that ignoble, private space of excretion and vulnerability. It's a powerful conflation of epic battle and base human function, underscoring Joyce's constant effort to root grand historical narratives in the dirty, undignified realities of the body. The living ditch becomes a universal symbol of suffering, whether on a battlefield or in a moment of personal humiliation.
And then we have the Jinnies. Who are they, and what's their role in this chaotic scene? They seem to be more than just passive onlookers. They're active participants in the drama, it sounds like.
Oh, definitely active. The Jinnies are equally multifaceted, embodying a range of female archetypes and roles. They are camp followers and provocateuses associated with figures like the scheming courtesan Harriet Wilson, who famously attempted to blackmail Wellington. So there's that historical link. This highlights the often overlooked influence of women operating in the shadows of power. But they are also deeply linked to the dual figures of Iseult of the fair hair and Iseult of the white hands, Tristan's passionate lover and his neglected wife, respectively. This connection symbolizes Issy's twin personalities, the elusive, seductive side and the more grounded, perhaps melancholic side. They represent the feminine principle that both tempts and subverts the male-dominated historical narrative.
Their actions sound quite deceptive, perhaps even a bit scandalous for figures in a historical battle scene.
They are indeed. Deceptive and provocative, they are described fainting to read in their handmaid's book of astrology while making their war undecides the Willingdon. Now, this is a classic Joycean pun, quite crude, actually. It suggests they are not making actual war, but rather making water urinating in plain sight. And in doing so, revealing their undies, or undersides. It's a calculated act of both defiance and provocation. Furthermore, they're cooing, like doves symbolizing innocence or flirtation, and ravening, like ravens symbolizing predation or a darker nature. Hair further underscores Issy's dual nature, simultaneously innocent and tempting, gentle and predatory, seductive and destructive. They are a force of both distraction and subversion on the battlefield, embodying the unpredictable, often erotic influence of the feminine principle on the course of history and male ambition.
There's also Mab Belchum, a rather pitiable figure, it seems, acting as a go-between, carrying messages across this bizarre battlefield. He sounds like a character who carries a lot of symbolic weight, despite a seemingly minor role.
Belchum is another highly layered character, yes. A quintessential Joycean figure of the downtrodden, you could say. He's an avatar for Sackerson, who is an old bartender or manservant in HCE's tavern in the Wake's broader narrative. He's often identified with a serpent from Eden, suggesting a primal, perhaps fallen nature, a tempter, or maybe just a bearer of forbidden knowledge. His name clearly evokes Belgium, the country where Waterloo is located, linking him to the physical setting. But it also puns on Jem Belcher, a pugilistic champion nicknamed Napoleon of the Ring, suggesting a fighting spirit, perhaps even a figure of Irish resistance. And significantly, he's linked to Blucher, Wellington's crucial Prussian ally at Waterloo, showing how even allies can be conflated and distorted in this dreamlike history. He's repeatedly described as drunken, belching, embodying the indigenous inhabitants subjugated by invaders, a figure of both profound historical resonance and personal degradation forced into subservience.
And what kind of messages does this unfortunate character carry? It sounds like it's not a pleasant task, given his portrayal.
No, definitely not pleasant. Belchum carries crucial, often unpleasant messages that drive the fragmented narrative. He first delivers the Jinnies' hasting dispatch, which is a forged letter from the Jinnies to Willingdon, slyly purporting to be from Napoleon, a classic example of deception in love and war. Later, he carries Willingdon's dispatchback, his reply. The imagery surrounding these messages is grim and visceral, emphasizing the brutality of war and the suffering of those on the periphery. The dispatch is described as being ripped onto his naked skin or torn onto the hapless messenger's buttocks, a powerful and shocking detail. It really emphasizes the suffering and degradation of soldiers in war and the casual cruelty of their commanders. It's a literal inscription of history onto the body of the common man. His distinctive 12-mile cowchicks rubber Wellington boots are noted as he undertakes a circular, almost marathon-length journey around the battlefield. This detail connects later to Joyce's battle diagram, showing Belchum's meticulously charted, arduous, and circular movements.
So these characters, these figures, are constantly shifting identities and embodying multiple roles. It sounds like a similar process happens with the setting itself. While Waterloo is the primary setting, it quickly becomes clear that this isn't just one battle. Joyce seems to be suggesting a universal conflict, an battle that encompasses all of history.
Exactly. That's another fundamental insight into Joyce's cyclical view of history, probably influenced by Vico. He uses Waterloo not as a singular event, but as a central hub, a nexus to conflate countless other historical and even mythological conflicts. It's an astounding tapestry of warfare where all battles blur into one. We hear direct allusions to the Battle of the Boyne, which is often called Ireland's Waterloo, due to its similar historical significance in establishing English dominance. But then it sweeps across continents and centuries. Hastings, Corbissy, Agincourt, Fontenoy, where the Irish wild geese famously fought against the English Salamanca, Magenta, the Peloponnesian War, the Crimean War, where the famous ballad Buckley Shot the Russian General comes into play. The list just goes on, weaving through Solferino, Thermopylae, Bannockburn, Almeida, Orthez, Toulouse, Assay, Gauguin, Argonne, Spionkop, Jena Auerstedt, Leipzig, Marathon, and even mythological battles like Kemmel. The insight here is that Joyce presents war not as a series of isolated events, but as a perpetual recurring cycle of human conflict, endlessly replaying itself with different players and different names, yet with the same underlying patterns. It collapses time and space, showing history as a grand, repeating drama.
Joyce's language here is truly a masterclass in puns and associations. How does he use it to create this labyrinth of intertwined histories and meanings? It feels like every single word is doing multiple jobs at once, almost overburdened with meaning.
You've hit on a core aspect of Joyce's genius in the Wake, absolutely, and what makes it both challenging and incredibly rewarding. Every word is a knot of meaning, a dense cluster of puns, etymologies, and cultural associations from dozens of languages. It's incredible. Museyroom itself is a prime example. It's a museum, a music room, and Mauschen, a Greek term for a temple to the muses, a place of learning and inspiration. But then it collapses into a chamber pot and an outhouse, or loo. This continuous layering ensures that no single meaning is stable, reflecting the fluid, dream logic of the entire book. The insight here is that Joyce uses language to mirror the subconscious, where associations flow freely and linear logic often dissolves. It's as if language itself is in a constant state of flux and reinterpretation, inviting the reader to participate actively in constructing meaning.
Can you give us a few more vivid examples of how this wordplay operates? It sounds incredibly intricate, almost like a linguistic puzzle box you have to unlock.
Certainly. Take French. It's French, of course, referring to the historical enemy, but it's also a historical surname and a pun on cannon or gun. So in one word, you have the enemy, a person, and a weapon, all bundled together. Lipoleum is Napoleon, but also lipos, fat or lard, suggesting his historical image as a short, stout man. Linoleum, a common floor covering, bringing him down to earth. And oleum, oil, possibly a sacred anointing or just a slippery substance. Copenhagen suggests Copenhagen, the city and the horse, but also cuckold and arse, layering in sexual humiliation and physical crudity. This density means that understanding often comes from embracing ambiguity rather than seeking a single definitive interpretation, forcing us to think associatively. Other playful subversions include cap and sorcerer, which sounds like cup and saucer, an everyday domestic item, but also means cap and sorcerer. It playfully twists military insignia into something magical and deceptive. Mistletoes combines mistletoe, sacred to druids, suggesting ancient pagan rituals or maybe a kiss, with missile troops, juxtaposing the ancient and the modern in warfare. And the poppy nose links a cooked chicken's rump to a poppy red drunken nose, to the poppy symbol of WWI remembrance, and even possibly to a Pope's nose machine gun. It's a linguistic explosion where seemingly disparate ideas are fused, creating a powerful, unsettling, and often humorous tapestry of meaning that constantly reminds us of the interconnectedness of all things, however absurd. The constant wordplay makes the reader an active participant, really a detective seeking connections rather than a passive recipient of information.
It seems like the bodily, often crude aspects of human experience are constantly interwoven with the grand historical narrative. Nothing is sacred, not even the battlefield. This is a consistent thread throughout the section, isn't it?
Without a doubt. Joyce consistently grounds the epic in the scatological and the sexual, humorously, often brutally, deflating any sense of pure heroism or unadulterated grandiosity. The living Dutch isn't just a battlefield feature, a sunken lane. It's also HCE in his outhouse, performing a most private, undignified bodily function. The very word loo itself means toilet, of course. Bog Lipoleum plays on Big Napoleon, but also bog house, toilet. The wide arse of Willingdon's horse connects directly to HCE on the privy and, by extension, engaged in sexual intercourse. This constant interweaving of the high and the low, the public and the private, the epic and the excretory is a hallmark of the Wake. It's Joyce's way of reminding us that beneath all the pomp and circumstance of history, human beings are still biological creatures, prone to the same desires, embarrassments, and vulnerabilities. The insight here is that the grand narratives of history are ultimately built upon very earthy human foundations.
So the sexual innuendo is very intentional then, not just accidental wordplay. It serves a specific subversive purpose.
Extremely intentional, yes, and deeply embedded. The telescope as a clear phallic symbol, the Jinnies making war undecides, urinating and showing their undies. Willingdon's get the band up, meaning to get an erection. These are all deliberate and unmistakable. And then there's the truly explicit waggling his tail-a-scrup with the half of a hat of Lipoleums to insult on the Hindu sea boy, which suggests a pissing contest maybe, a crude act of sexual dominance, or even wiping his arse with the hat of his vanquished enemy. It's quite graphic. These details firmly ground the epic battle in the base human body and its functions. It's a relentless, often crude humor that serves to democratize history, you could say, to strip away its pretenses, reminding us that behind every grand narrative are messy, fallible human beings driven by primal urges, often acting in absurd and undignified ways. It's Joyce asking us to look past the official version and see the raw, often unseemly truth beneath.
Now, this section makes a powerful connection to real-world monuments, particularly the Wellington Monument in Phoenix Park in Dublin. So it's not just a literary construct, but a commentary on tangible historical markers and their often contested meanings.
That's right. That monument, the towering obelisk completed in 1861, is a crucial symbol within the Wake and, of course, within Irish history. It commemorates Wellington's victories with 4 bronze plaques depicting civil and religious liberty, Waterloo, Indian Wars, and an inscription proclaiming his invincibility across Asia and Europe. It stands as a powerful emblem of British imperial dominance right there in Dublin's main park. And in the narrative, HCE repeatedly points to this monument in his stuttering self-defense against the cad, his accuser in Phoenix Park. He desperately hopes it will support his word and prove his innocence, declaring, "I have won straight," trying to leverage a public symbol of victory to bolster his private contested reputation. He uses it as a physical testament to his own claimed victories, a desperate appeal to a fixed, authoritative version of history.
But this monument, like so many historical markers, it doesn't carry a single, universally accepted meaning, does it? Its symbolism must be deeply contested, especially in an Irish context, where history is always so fraught with political significance.
Precisely. No, it absolutely doesn't. For imperialists, it's a sign of redemption, deliverance from enemies like Napoleon, a symbol of order and triumph. For Irish nationalists, however, it symbolizes bondage and oppression, a stark reminder of colonial subjugation, a massive stone insult almost. The sources draw a direct parallel between the Hindu Shem-Shaun blowing up Willingdon's big white horse in the Museyroom and the very real act of Irish Catholics vandalizing and blowing up King William III's equestrian statue in Dublin in 1836. This act of iconoclasm wasn't just mindless vandalism, it was a powerful symbolic act of political protest, highlighting the clash of interpretations and the rejection of imposed historical narratives. The insight here is that monuments are never neutral. They are always imbued with contested meanings, especially by those who feel their history has been suppressed or ignored.
So Irish nationalists weren't just passively accepting these symbols of British rule, they were actively constructing their own historical narratives, often through acts of symbolic defiance or reinterpretation.
Exactly, they had to. Irish public figures like Daniel O'Connell, the great emancipator, Thomas Davis, the young Irelander, and William O'Brien, a later nationalist leader, frequently used ancient sites. Sites like Tara, Mullabest, and Newgrange, and artifacts like the Cross of Cong to rally support. They linked a glorious pre-colonial past to a desired independent future. They leveraged these ancient symbols to awaken national consciousness. O'Connell, in particular, is depicted as a ventriloquent agitator, speaking for these mute sites, breathing political life into them, imbuing them with profound political meaning and emotional resonance for the Irish people. These monuments and sites became instruments in a political struggle, embodying collective memory, historical grievance, and future aspirations. They weren't just stones, they were voices.
So Joyce is clearly questioning the very idea of how history is remembered and presented. He seems quite critical of romanticizing the past or viewing it as something fixed and objective.
Absolutely. Joyce was deeply skeptical of that kind of romantic nostalgia for an authentic past, or the notion of history as a static, objective truth to be passively consumed. He famously likened Rome's ruins to a man who lives by exhibiting to travelers his grandmother's corpse, a very stark and visceral image.
Oof, that's harsh.
It is. It suggested a lifeless, exploitative relationship with history when it's treated as a dead artifact. He saw museums in a similar vein as cemeteries of wasted effort that buried creative possibilities and stifled genuine engagement with the past. The Museyroom itself is even called a Museyruin in early drafts, reflecting its decaying, reinterpreted, and ultimately unstable nature. The insight here is that Joyce rejects the idea of history as a rigid, finished product, preferring to see it as something living, fluid, and open to constant reinterpretation.
But is he just being entirely cynical about it? Or is there a sense of preservation and regeneration in his approach to these historical cemeteries? It feels like there might be more to it.
That's the crucial nuance Joyce brings, yes. While critiquing the static, corpse-like monument, he also shows how the Museyroom, by preserving the debris of the past, the discarded, the forgotten, actually helps to fertilize the Viscian renewal of history. Now, Giambattista Vico was an 18th century philosopher whose cyclical theory of history deeply influenced Joyce. So this Viscian renewal is Joyce's way of saying that history isn't linear, but constantly repeats and regenerates, like a midden heap fertilizing new growth. The old is always transformed into the new, giving the past a living, dynamic role rather than a dead, static one. The Museyroom survives through constant transformation, from an elevated structure to a midden heap and back again, participating in a regenerative process of memory work. It's not about finding a definitive past, but about the ongoing vital process of remembering, reinterpreting, and adapting it to the present, ensuring its continued life.
So what does this all mean for how we understand history in Finnegans Wake? If monuments and museums are flawed, is there an ultimate truth teller amidst all this ambiguity and contested memory? Or is that the wrong question?
It's a good question, and it leads to one of the central arguments Joyce seems to be making. Ultimately, for Joyce, the Monument Museum's capacity to objectify history is deeply disputed, its history perpetually contended. The authority to represent history is conceded not to the rigid imposing monument with its fixed, often imperial claims, but to ALP's letter. ALP, Anna Livia Plurabelle, is the river mother figure in the wake, embodying the feminine principle, the flow of life and language. Her letter is a textual, fragile, and often reinterpreted entity, described as the first babe of reconcilement. It becomes the true sign of our Ruru redemption and the chief bearer of meaning. However unstable or open to multiple readings it might be, this supremacy of the verbal over the monumental suggests life over death, a profound statement on the enduring, dynamic power of narrative, language, and interpretation over static, stone-carved pronouncements. The insight is that living, evolving stories, however fragmented they might be, are ultimately more truthful than any fixed edifice.
Given the incredible complexity of this section, with its layers of meaning, shifting identities, historical allusions, I imagine Joyce had some serious organizational tools to keep everything straight. And we're talking about a literal diagram here, right? Not just mental notes, but a tangible visual map of his creation.
Indeed, that's one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes insights into Joyce's mind and his compositional process, his battle diagram. It wasn't included in the final published book, which is interesting in itself, but it was a crucial working diagram or pictorial schema for his composition. It highlights just how visual and spatial Joyce's thinking could be, mapping out the movements and interactions of his characters with meticulous, almost architectural detail. It's a glimpse into the scaffolding of his genius.
Where did this idea for such a detailed visual map come from? Was it a common practice for writers of his time, or was this uniquely Joycean?
It seems pretty unique to him, at least in this form. It originated in his notebook VIB-15, which he started shortly after his Waterloo visit in 1926. Scholars hypothesize it was directly inspired by actual battle maps found in Sir Edward Creasy's The 15 Decisive Battles of the World, a book Joyce studied extensively. Creasy's maps used dashed lines and arrows to show troop movements, a feature Joyce clearly adopted for his own diagram. He then used sigla, highly simplified, almost hieroglyphic symbols to represent the main characters. For example, H for Wellington, HCE, represented as a stable, almost block-like figure. DGC for the Lipoleums, representing Shem-Shaun and Shem, often shown as smaller, more fluid shapes. JK for the Jinnies, Izzy and her mirror image, often depicted as two mirrored figures. E for the Delian Alps, ALP is a sweeping mountain range, signifying the feminine landscape. And S for Belchum, Sackerson, often a more circular or winding path. Each character had its designated dynamic place on this map, acting as visual cues for their textual appearance and movement.
So how did this diagram actually help him write? Was it just a rough guide, or did it truly dictate the narrative, almost like a choreographic score for his characters?
It was incredibly integral, far more than a mere compositional aid. It seems it really drove the process. The diagram dictated and directed much of the narrative's macro-level creation, including the ordering of sections and precisely when and where protagonists appeared. But it also fine-tuned micro-level textual fragments, especially those involving the precise positioning of sigla within the narrative itself. For example, the Jinnies are positioned undersides, or on the underside of Wellington on the diagram, and he is described as being upsides opposite them in the text. This isn't accidental. It shows a direct textual visual correlation, a structural integrity enforced by the diagram. It's as if he was translating a complex stage blocking into words.
That's remarkable. Can you elaborate on how it actually